They tried to enslave Earth. Now they're kneeling for mercy. The Celestial Tribunal floated in the void between galaxies, a massive crystalline structure that had overseen interstellar justice for 10,000 years. Today, representatives from across the known universe had gathered for what they believed would be a simple verdict. Earth's fate hung in the balance, and to the assembled aliens, the outcome seemed obvious. Ambassador Ryuji Kimura stood alone in the center of the tribunal chamber, his simple gray uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate armor and ornate robes worn by the alien delegates surrounding him. Above his head, holographic displays showed Earth in all its beauty, rolling green hills, vast blue oceans, sprawling cities that gleamed in the sunlight. To the watching aliens, it looked like paradise. To them, it looked like profit. Pathetic, sneered Warlord Vexithol of the Crimson Hegemony, his forearms crossed over his massive chest. Their military consists of primitive projectile weapons and chemical explosives. My youngest spawn could conquer their entire planet with a single battlecruiser. High Inquisitor Zaralyn of the Void Syndicate laughed, her crystalline voice echoing through the chamber. Look at their so-called space program. They barely managed to place a few metal cans on their own moon. They are insects pretending to be gods. One by one, the most powerful civilizations in the universe voiced their contempt. The Stellar Empire mocked Earth's fragmented governments. The Neural Collective dismissed humanity's primitive computing systems. The Quantum Lords ridiculed their understanding of physics. Each insult was met with laughter and agreement from the crowd. Ambassador Kimura stood perfectly still throughout the mockery, his dark eyes moving slowly across the chamber, memorizing every face, every species that chose to laugh at his people. His expression remained calm, almost serene, but those who looked closely might have noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled ever so slightly at his sides. Supreme Arbiter Amnarch, the ancient being who had presided over the tribunal for millennia, raised one of his 6 hands for silence. His voice resonated through the chamber with the weight of absolute authority. The evidence has been presented. The testimonies have been heard. It is time to decide the fate of the world called Earth. The chamber fell silent. Thousands of representatives from hundreds of species sat forward in anticipation. The vote was a formality. Everyone knew how it would end. All those in favor of declaring Earth a protectorate world, subject to controlled exploitation and population management, raise your appendages. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Claws, tentacles, mechanical arms, energy projections, and limbs of every conceivable shape rose into the air. The vote wasn't even close, it was unanimous. Every single species in the tribunal had voted to reduce Earth to a slave world. All except one. Ambassador Kimura's arms remained at his sides. He looked around the chamber slowly, his gaze lingering on each delegation that had voted against his people. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational. Thank you for your honesty. Several aliens chuckled at what they assumed was acceptance of defeat, but something in the human's tone made others shift uncomfortably in their seats. You have shown us exactly who you are, Kimura continued, his voice growing colder. You have revealed your true nature, and for that, I am grateful. Supreme Arbiter Amnarch leaned forward, his ancient eyes narrowing. Do you have something to say, human? The vote is concluded. Your world's fate is sealed. Kimura smiled then, a small, quiet expression that somehow managed to send a chill through the vast chamber. Sealed? Yes, I suppose it is, but not in the way you think. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device no larger than a coin. With deliberate slowness, he pressed a button on its surface. Immediately, the holographic displays above changed. Instead of showing Earth's natural beauty, they now displayed something that made the entire tribunal fall silent. Massive orbital platforms hung in space around Earth, bristling with weapons technology that shouldn't have existed. Sleek warships, each one dwarfing the largest vessels in the alien fleets, moved through Earth's solar system with predatory grace. Underground facilities carved deep into mountains revealed themselves, their entrances opening like the eyes of sleeping giants awakening. Impossible. whispered Warlord Vexithal, his 4 eyes wide with shock. The images continued to scroll. Advanced manufacturing complexes that could build a fleet in days. Energy weapons that bent the laws of physics. Shields that could deflect the combined firepower of entire armadas. And at the center of it all, a command structure more sophisticated than anything the universe had ever seen. You see, Ambassador Kimura said, his voice now carrying an edge that cut through the silence like a blade. You made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because we appeared weak, we were weak. You assumed that because we seemed divided, we were vulnerable. You assumed that because we asked for peace, we couldn't wage war. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. We are not the primitives you believed us to be. We have never been primitives. We have been preparing, waiting, watching. And now, thanks to your vote, we know exactly who our enemies are. Supreme Arbiter Omnarch slammed his gavel, the sound echoing like thunder. This is preposterous. No world could hide such capabilities from the Tribunal's censors. Kimura's smile grew wider, colder. No world? Perhaps not. But Earth isn't just any world. We've had help. Friends you didn't know existed. Allies you never bothered to consider. The holographic display shifted again, showing massive structures in the empty spaces between galaxies. Space stations that had been invisible to all scans, their stealth technology decades ahead of anything the Tribunal possessed. And on these stations, beings worked alongside humans, species that had been thought extinct, civilizations that had supposedly vanished into the void. The Ancients, gasped High Inquisitor Zarlin, her crystalline form flickering with fear. But they disappeared eons ago. Disappeared? Kimura shook his head. No, they went into hiding. They've been watching the universe, waiting for the right moment to act. Waiting for the right species to stand with them against civilizations like yours. Civilizations that see other worlds as nothing more than resources to be consumed. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other, some demanding explanations, others calling for immediate military action. But through it all, Ambassador Kimura stood perfectly calm, watching the panic spread like wildfire. You voted to enslave us, he said, his voice somehow cutting through the noise. You voted to strip away our freedom, to treat our people like cattle. You showed no mercy, no compassion, no consideration for the lives you would destroy. The shouting died down as his words reached every corner of the chamber. So we will show you the same mercy you showed us. He turned toward the exit, but paused at the threshold. Oh, and one more thing. That device I just pressed? It wasn't just a communicator. It was a signal beacon. Every ship, every station, every weapon system we've built over the past century just came online. And they all have one directive. Protect Earth at any cost. The massive doors of the tribunal chamber began to close behind him, but his final words echoed through the space with terrifying clarity. The vote is indeed concluded. You have sealed your fate. Now you get to live with the consequences. As the doors sealed shut, cutting off Earth's connection to the tribunal, alarms began blaring throughout the massive structure. Outside, in the void of space, dark shapes began to emerge from seemingly empty regions. Ships that had been invisible moments before materialized like ghosts becoming solid. The Tribunal's defense fleet, once thought impregnable, suddenly looked very small and very alone. Back on Earth, in a command center buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Zoe Williams sat before an array of holographic displays showing the positions of every major fleet in the known universe. Around her, technicians and officers worked with quiet efficiency, their faces grim but determined. Admiral, called out Commander Riker Valdez from his station. We're receiving surrender requests from 12 minor species. They're claiming they were coerced into voting against us. Admiral Williams' expression didn't change. Too late for that. They had their chance to abstain. They chose their side. She turned to another officer. Captain Okafor, what's the status of the Tribunal Defense Fleet? Captain Amara Okafor consulted her displays. They're trying to form a defensive perimeter around the station. Estimated forces, 800 ships, mostly heavy cruisers and dreadnoughts. They significantly outgun us in terms of raw firepower. Admiral Williams smiled. the same cold smile that Ambassador Kimura had worn in the tribunal chamber. "They're thinking like the old universe, Captain. Raw firepower is meaningless when your enemies can't see you coming." She stood up and walked to the central command display, which showed a three-dimensional map of the tribunal sector. Red dots indicated alien positions, while blue dots marked human vessels. But there were far more blue dots than anyone had expected. "Initiate Protocol 7, she ordered. Across the command center, officers began entering commands into their systems. On the display, the blue dots began to move, converging on the tribunal from angles that should have been impossible to achieve undetected. Meanwhile, aboard the tribunal station, panic was spreading through the corridors. Supreme Arbiter Omnarch had called an emergency session, but half the delegates were too terrified to attend. The others were frantically trying to contact their homeworlds, desperately seeking guidance from leaders who were just as confused and frightened as they were. Warlord Vexathul paced back and forth in the chamber, his forearms gesticulating wildly as he spoke into a communicator. "I don't care what it takes. Mobilize the entire Crimson Fleet. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. These humans think they can intimidate us, but they're about to learn what real power looks like." But even as he spoke, reports were flooding in that made his words ring hollow. Human ships had been spotted near every major military installation in Crimson hegemony space. Not attacking, just watching, waiting. The message was clear: we know where you live. High Inquisitor Zaralin was having similar problems. The Void Syndicate's most secret bases, hidden in the dark spaces between stars, were suddenly visible on all sensors. Somehow, impossibly, the humans had found every single one. "How?" she whispered to herself, staring at the reports streaming across her personal display. "Our stealth technology is perfect. It's impossible to detect our hidden facilities." The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep in the lower levels of the tribunal station, in chambers that most delegates didn't even know existed, ancient beings stirred from their long slumber. The precursors, the first spacefaring civilization, thought to be extinct for millions of years, began to emerge from stasis pods that had kept them hidden since before recorded history. Elder Ruji Thrun, whose species had built the first star maps and established the first interstellar laws, stretched his ancient limbs and activated communication systems that hadn't been used in eons. His message reached not only the tribunal, but every world in the galaxy. "Children of the Void," his voice echoed across space, carrying the weight of countless millennia. "You have been judged and found wanting. The young ones from the blue world ask for peace, for understanding, for acceptance into the cosmic community. You offered them chains." The transmission continued, each word dropping like a stone into still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the universe. "Long have we watched from the shadows, waiting for a species worthy of our legacy. The humans have proved themselves. They faced your mockery with dignity. They met your threats with quiet strength. They offered friendship even to those who plotted their destruction." Aboard the tribunal station, Supreme Arbiter Omnarch felt something he hadn't experienced in his 1,000-year reign: genuine fear. The precursors were not just ancient, they were powerful beyond imagination. Their technology had been the foundation for every advancement in the last million years, and now they were aligned with humanity. "But you," Elder Rujathron's voice continued, "you saw only weakness where there was wisdom. You saw only prey where there were potential partners. You chose exploitation over cooperation, domination over unity, and so you have chosen your fate." The first human ship materialized inside the tribunal's defense perimeter without triggering a single alarm. The INS Retribution was a vessel unlike anything the universe had ever seen, sleek, dark, and radiating a sense of barely contained power. It moved through space with the fluid grace of a predator, its weapon systems online but not yet active. On the bridge of the Retribution, Captain Phoenix Reeves watched the alien fleet scramble to respond to their sudden appearance. The enemy ships were moving in predictable patterns, following tactics that were thousands of years old. They had learned to fight other conventional forces, but they had never faced anything like what humanity had become. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Zara Kim from the sensor station, "the alien fleet is attempting to surround us. They're deploying in formation Delta 7. Standard encirclement protocol. Captain Reeves nodded calmly. Let them begin Phase 1. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for centuries to come. The Retribution didn't flee from the encircling enemy ships. It simply vanished. Not destroyed, not cloaked, but gone as if it had never existed. The alien sensors showed empty space where moments before a massive warship had been floating. Then the attacks began. Across the alien formation, ships began to suffer mysterious systems failures. Engines shut down without warning, weapons refused to fire. Life support systems flickered and died. One by one, the vessels of the Tribunal Defense Fleet found themselves dead in space, their crews trapped inside floating coffins of metal and composite. Ghost protocols are operating within normal parameters, reported Lieutenant Kim, monitoring the attack from the Retribution's hidden position. Enemy fleet is at 60% operational capacity and falling. The Ghost protocols were humanity's secret weapon. Nanoscale infiltration systems that could penetrate any ship's defenses and systematically shut down every critical system. The aliens couldn't fight what they couldn't see, couldn't defend against weapons they didn't understand existed. But the real demonstration of power was yet to come. From the depths of space where nothing should have been able to hide, a structure began to materialize. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of the Tribunal Station, and it appeared to be constructed from materials that shouldn't have been able to exist. The surface rippled like liquid metal while maintaining perfect structural integrity. Weapons ports opened along its length, revealing energy conduits that glowed with barely contained stellar fire. "My God," whispered Supreme Arbiter Omnarch, staring at the impossible sight. "What is that thing?" The answer came in the form of a transmission that reached every ship, every station, every world in the local galactic cluster. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly terrifying in its implications. "This is Admiral Zoe William of the Earth Defense Force. You are witnessing the activation of Tartarus Station, humanity's first stellar engineering project. This station is powered by a controlled black hole and armed with weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems." The transmission paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. "For the past 50 years, while you have been playing politics and fighting petty wars, we have been building, planning, preparing for the day when the universe would show us its true face. Today, that day has arrived." On the Tribunal Station, chaos had completely taken hold. Delegates who had been laughing at humanity's weakness hours before were now scrambling to contact their homeworlds, begging for evacuation, pleading for someone, anyone, to save them from the nightmare they had awakened. But there would be no salvation coming. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on every world that had voted for Earth's enslavement. Human ships appeared in orbit around capital worlds, not attacking, but simply making their presence known. The message was clear: we can reach you anywhere, anytime. Emperor Dracoon of the Stellar Empire watched from his throne room as sleek human vessels moved through his system with impunity. His own fleet, once the terror of a dozen sectors, sat helplessly in dock, their crews too frightened to launch after witnessing what had happened to the Tribunal Defense Fleet. "How many ships do they have?" he demanded of his military advisors. General Vostok consulted his reports with shaking hands. "Unknown, my lord. Our sensors detect new vessels every hour. They appear to have been constructing a shadow fleet for decades, possibly centuries." The Emperor's three hearts sank. Centuries of preparation, generations of planning. While his empire had grown fat and complacent, the humans had been turning themselves into the ultimate predator. Back aboard the Retribution, Captain Reeves received a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Williams' face appeared on the main screen, her expression as cold and determined as ever. "Captain, initiate Phase 2. It's time to show them what mercy looks like when it comes from a position of absolute strength." "Understood, Admiral. Beginning Phase 2 deployment." Phase 2 was psychological warfare on a scale never before attempted. Human ships began broadcasting directly into the neural networks of every alien species, bypassing their communication systems entirely. The broadcasts weren't threats or demands, they were memories. The aliens found themselves experiencing Earth's history through human eyes. They felt the terror of ancient battlefields, The desperation of survivors clinging to life in bombed-out cities. The rage of parents watching their children suffer under the boot of oppression. They experienced what it meant to be the victims of those who saw other lives as nothing more than resources to be exploited. But they also experienced something else: humanity's capacity for growth, for learning from their mistakes, for choosing cooperation over conquest when given the chance. They felt the hope that had driven humans to reach for the stars, the dreams of finding friends among the cosmic community, the genuine desire for peace that had been offered to the tribunal. The psychological assault lasted only minutes, but for the aliens experiencing it, it felt like lifetimes. When it finally ended, many of them were weeping, those that were capable of tears. Others simply sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had done. High Inquisitor Zarlin was among those who broke completely. The crystalline being who had mocked humanity's primitive technology now huddled in a corner of her personal chamber, her form flickering erratically as her neural pathways struggled to process what she had experienced. "We didn't know," she whispered to herself. "We didn't understand." But ignorance was no excuse, and the humans had made that perfectly clear. Supreme Arbiter Omnarch, his ancient authority crumbling around him, attempted one last desperate gambit. He activated the Tribunal's most powerful communication array and broadcast a message across the galaxy. "People of the universe," his weakened voice carried to every inhabited world, "we face an unprecedented threat. The humans have revealed weapons and capabilities beyond our understanding. They pose a danger to all free civilizations. We must unite against this common enemy before it is too late." The response to his plea was swift and devastating. Elder Rajithrun's voice cut through his transmission like a laser through tissue paper. "Free civilizations?" The ancient being's voice dripped with contempt. "You speak of freedom while voting to enslave an entire world? You speak of threats while planning to strip away the liberty of billions of innocent beings?" The Elder's communication system accessed every database, every record, every hidden file in tribunal space. Within moments, the complete voting records were broadcast for all to see. Not just the final tally, but the private discussions, the gleeful planning for Earth's exploitation, the casual dismissal of human suffering as acceptable collateral damage. "Let all the universe see what you truly are," Elder Rajithrun declared. "Let them judge who the real threat has been all along." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Species after species looked at the recordings and realized the truth. The tribunal hadn't just voted to enslave Earth, they had done it with enthusiasm, with joy at the prospect of profit from human suffering. One by one, the minor species who had been pressured into supporting the tribunal began to switch sides. The Gentle Collective, a peaceful federation of traders and explorers, was the first to announce their support for Earth. Others quickly followed, recognizing that humanity represented something the galaxy had been missing for too long, a power that protected rather than exploited. But the major powers, the Crimson Hegemony, the Void Syndicate, the Stellar Empire, and the others who had laughed loudest at Earth's ambassadors, they chose to double down on their decision. Warlord Vexithol, his pride wounded beyond repair, made a final desperate play. He activated an ancient weapon system, a relic from the first Galactic Wars that had been banned by cosmic treaty for millennia. The Void Render was capable of tearing holes in spacetime itself, creating weapons-grade black holes that could swallow entire solar systems. "If we cannot rule," he broadcast defiantly, "then let the universe burn. At least we will take the humans with us." The weapon began to charge, its massive energy requirements drawing power from every available source in Crimson Hegemony space. Stars began to dim as their energy was siphoned off to feed the device. Entire worlds went dark as their power grids were drained. But Warlord Vexithol had made the same mistake as all the others. He had underestimated humanity's preparation. Deep within Tartarus Station, systems that had been waiting patiently for decades finally activated. The controlled black hole at the station's core began to spin faster, generating energies that bent the laws of physics into new shapes. Around the station, space itself began to warp and twist as humanity's most secret project revealed itself. The quantum anchor was humanity's ultimate weapon, not a device for destruction, but one for absolute control. It could lock down entire regions of space, making faster than light travel impossible, preventing weapons from charging, even stopping the fundamental forces that held atoms together. As the Void Render reached critical charge, the quantum anchor activated. The weapon didn't explode, it simply stopped working. The massive energies it had been gathering dissipated harmlessly into space. The black hole it was trying to create never formed. Warlord Vexithul stared at his displays in incomprehension. "Impossible," he whispered. "Nothing can stop the Void Render once it begins charging." Admiral Williams' voice reached him from across the galaxy, calm and coldly amused. "Nothing you understand, perhaps. But we've had a long time to study your technology, Warlord. A very long time to find its weaknesses." The demonstration of the quantum anchor broke the last remnants of alien resistance. If humanity could stop their most powerful weapons from functioning, what chance did conventional fleets have? One by one, the great powers of the galaxy began to send surrender signals. But humanity was not interested in surrender. They were interested in justice. The trials began immediately. Using the evidence gathered over decades of observation, human prosecutors laid out charges against every government, every leader, every individual who had participated in the vote to enslave Earth. The charges were simple but devastating: conspiracy to commit genocide, attempted enslavement of an entire species, and crimes against the fundamental rights of sentient beings. The trials were broadcast across the galaxy, allowing every civilization to see the evidence for themselves. The aliens were not tortured or mistreated. Humanity had risen above such barbarity. But they were forced to confront the reality of what they had attempted to do, to listen as the consequences of their actions were laid out in clinical, devastating detail. Supreme Arbiter Omnarch, once the most powerful being in the known universe, sat in a simple chair as human prosecutors presented their case. The evidence was overwhelming: recorded conversations showing his enthusiastic support for Earth's enslavement, detailed plans for the distribution of human slaves throughout the galaxy, projections of profit from the complete strip mining of Earth's resources. "Do you understand the charges against you?" asked Prosecutor Luna Voss, her voice professional but implacable. The ancient alien looked up with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. "I understand that we have lost," he said quietly. "I understand that we underestimated you completely." "That's not what I asked," Prosecutor Voss replied. "Do you understand that you and your colleagues attempted to reduce an entire species to slavery? Do you comprehend the suffering you would have caused?" Supreme Arbiter Omnarch was silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time in his 1,000-year reign, he began to weep. The trials continued for months, but the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was too complete, the crimes too clear, the defendants too broken to mount any meaningful defense. One by one, the great powers of the galaxy were found guilty of crimes against sentience. But the sentences were not what anyone expected. "The defendants are hereby sentenced to life," announced Chief Justice River Kane, her words echoing through the packed courtroom. "Life in service to the civilizations they sought to destroy. They will spend their remaining years working to repair the damage they have caused, to build rather than tear down, to protect rather than exploit." The alien defendants looked up in confusion. They had expected death or imprisonment or some form of brutal revenge. They had not expected to be given a chance at redemption. "You will be monitored at all times," Justice Kane continued. "You will be assigned to worlds and communities that need rebuilding. You will work without pay, without privilege, without the power you once wielded. But you will be given the opportunity to learn what it means to serve others rather than rule them." It was a sentence that was perhaps more cruel than death: to be stripped of all power and forced to help those they had once planned to exploit. But it was also an offer of redemption that few species in the galaxy would have extended to defeated enemies. The trials marked the end of the old galactic order, but they were just the beginning of humanity's transformation of the cosmos. Over the following years, human technology and philosophy spread throughout the galaxy, but not through conquest or coercion. They offered it freely to any species willing to embrace the principles that had guided Earth's rise. Cooperation over domination, protection of the weak over exploitation of the vulnerable, growth through unity rather than conquest. Many species eagerly embraced the new order. They had lived for millennia under the brutal hierarchies of the old powers, watching as the strong preyed upon the weak with impunity. The human model offered something different, a chance to build rather than tear down, to explore rather than exploit, to reach for something better than the endless cycle of conquest and oppression that had defined galactic civilization for eons. But the transformation was not complete. In the dark corners of the galaxy, in the hidden systems where the old powers had once plotted their schemes, new resistance movements began to form. They called themselves the Liberation Front, and they claimed to be fighting for freedom against human tyranny. Their first major attack came 3 years after the trials ended. A coordinated strike against human colonies in the Outer Rim, designed to prove that humanity was not invincible, that the new order could be challenged. The attack failed catastrophically. The human colonies were not the soft targets the Liberation Front had expected. Every settlement was protected by defense systems that made the old Tribunal fleet look like toys. Every civilian was trained in combat techniques that would have made professional soldiers from the old galaxy weep with envy, and every attack was anticipated, countered, and neutralized before it could cause significant damage. But more importantly, the humans were not alone in their defense. Species that had once cowered before the old powers now stood shoulder to shoulder with their human allies, fighting to protect the new order they had helped to build. Admiral William, now in her 70s but still sharp as a blade, watched the reports of the failed attacks from her command center deep beneath Earth's surface. Around her, the next generation of human and alien officers worked together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the old system. Admiral, reported Captain Jackson Cross, one of the new generation of human officers who had grown up in the post-Tribunal galaxy, the Liberation Front's last stronghold has been located. Intelligence indicates they're planning a final desperate attack on Earth itself. Admiral Williams smiled. Not the cold smile of her younger years, but something warmer, more confident. Let them come. It's time they learned the same lesson the Tribunal did all those years ago. The final battle of the Liberation War was not the massive fleet engagement the rebels had planned. It was a demonstration of just how far humanity and its allies had evolved in the years since the Tribunal's fall. The rebel fleet, composed of ships stolen from old military stockpiles and crewed by the most fanatical opponents of the New Order, approached Earth expecting to find a world grown soft with peace and prosperity. Instead, they found something that defied all their understanding of warfare. Earth was gone. Not destroyed, not evacuated, but simply absent from the space where it should have been. In its place was an expanding field of energy that seemed to bend reality around itself. The rebel sensors showed empty space, but their eyes could see something impossible, a world that existed and didn't exist simultaneously. Phase shift technology, whispered Rebel Commander Thexavar, staring at his displays in disbelief. They've moved their entire planet into another dimension. But Earth's disappearance was just the beginning. From the energy field that marked its former position, ships began to emerge. Not the sleek vessels of humanity's earlier fleets, but something entirely new. These ships seemed to be made of living light, their hulls shifting and flowing like liquid starfire. They moved through space without engines, turned without thrusters, and radiated a sense of power that made the old weapons of the galaxy seem like crude clubs. The lead ship transmitted a single message to the rebel fleet. You have 30 seconds to surrender before we demonstrate why attacking Earth is no longer physically possible. Commander Thexavar, his pride overruling his common sense, ordered his fleet to attack. All ships, open fire! Show these humans that the old galaxy will not bow to their new order. The rebel weapons fired, massive energy beams and projectile clouds racing toward the human vessels. But the attacks never reached their targets. Instead, they simply vanished, absorbed into the strange energy fields that surrounded the human ships like they had never existed at all. Then the humans responded. What happened next wasn't battle, it was transformation. The human ships didn't fire weapons at the rebel fleet. Instead, they projected fields of energy that enveloped the enemy vessels, and within moments, the rebel ships began to change. Metal hulls became transparent crystal. Weapon systems transformed into communication arrays. Life support systems evolved into hydroponic gardens. In minutes, ships designed for war had become vessels of exploration and peace, their original purposes completely rewritten at the molecular level. The rebel crews found themselves unharmed, but fundamentally changed as well. The hatred and fanaticism that had driven them to war was gone, replaced by a sense of wonder and possibility they had never experienced before. They looked at their transformed ships, at the impossible beauty of the human vessels, at the galaxy spread out before them like a canvas waiting to be painted with new possibilities. Commander Thexavar stared at his hands, still his own, but somehow different, better, filled with potential he had never imagined. When he spoke, his voice was filled with awe rather than anger. "What have you done to us?" The answer came from Admiral William herself, her image appearing on every screen in the transformed fleet. She looked older than she had during the Tribunal crisis, but her eyes held a wisdom and compassion that spoke of decades spent building rather than destroying. "We've given you what we gave ourselves," she said simply, "the chance to become more than you were. The old galaxy was built on the principle that some must fall so others can rise. We've built something different, a universe where everyone can grow, where everyone can contribute, where the only limits are the boundaries of imagination and compassion." She paused, looking directly into the camera as if she could see into the hearts of every former rebel watching her words. "You came here expecting to find weakness. You found evolution. You came expecting to find enemies. You found teachers willing to help you transform your anger into something productive. The choice is yours now. You can cling to the hatred that brought you here, or you can help us build something the galaxy has never seen before." The transformation of the Liberation Front marked the true end of the old Galactic Order. The rebels who had come to destroy Earth became some of its most passionate advocates, spreading the message of transformation and growth to the farthest corners of the galaxy. Over the following decades, humanity's influence continued to expand, but not through conquest or coercion. They had evolved beyond the need for such crude methods. Instead, they offered something far more powerful: hope. Hope for species that had lived in fear for millennia. Hope for worlds that had been strip-mined and abandoned. Hope for civilizations that had been ground down under the boot of the old powers. The galaxy began to change in ways that would have been unimaginable under the Tribunal's rule. Dead worlds were brought back to life through human terraforming technology. Species that had been driven to the edge of extinction were given new homes and the resources to rebuild. Ancient knowledge that had been hoarded by the old powers was freely shared, allowing civilizations to advance in years what had previously taken centuries. But perhaps the most significant change was in the nature of power itself. Under the old system, strength came from the ability to dominate others, to take what you wanted by force. In the new galaxy, strength came from the ability to help others grow, to create more than you consumed, to leave the universe better than you found it. The humans had not just defeated the old order, they had replaced it with something completely different, something the galaxy had never dared to imagine possible. 50 years after the Tribunal's fall, Ambassador Ryuji Kimura, now an elderly man but still sharp and determined, stood once again in a great chamber surrounded by representatives from across the known universe. But this was not the Tribunal of old. This was the Galactic Assembly, a body dedicated not to ruling over others, but to coordinating the efforts of free civilizations working together toward common goals. The chamber itself reflected the change. Where the old Tribunal had been built to intimidate and overawe, designed to make those who stood before it feel small and powerless, the assembly chamber was built to inspire and uplift. Soft light flowed from crystalline walls that seemed to pulse with life. The air carried the scent of growing things, of forests and gardens, and the promise of new beginnings. Ambassador Kimura looked around at the faces surrounding him. Many were familiar, representatives of species that had once voted for Earth's enslavement. But these were not the same beings who had laughed at humanity's perceived weakness decades ago. Their eyes held something different now: respect, understanding, and perhaps, most importantly, hope. 50 years ago, Kimura began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's perfect acoustics. You made a choice. You chose to see my people as resources to be exploited rather than partners to be embraced. Today we gather not to relitigate old grievances, but to celebrate how far we've all come. He gestured to the viewing ports that lined the chamber, through which the assembled delegates could see the impossible sight beyond. The assembly station didn't orbit a planet or float in empty space. It existed in the heart of a living nebula, one that humanity and its allies had coaxed into existence through technologies that merged science with something approaching artistry. Stars were being born in real time, their light painting the cosmic clouds in shades of blue and gold that had never existed in nature. This nebula represents what we can accomplish when we work together, Kimura continued. 17 different species contributed to its creation. The Zephyrians provided the stellar manipulation technology. The Christarch Collective contributed their expertise in energy harmonics. The former Void Syndicate members, he paused, letting that sink in, shared their knowledge of dark matter engineering. Former High Inquisitor Zara Lynn, now known simply as Zara, stood from her seat. Her crystalline form had changed over the decades, becoming more translucent, more radiant. The harsh edges that had once defined her appearance had been softened by years of service and learning. Ambassador, she said, her voice no longer carrying the cruel authority it once had, I request permission to address the assembly. Kimura nodded graciously. The floor recognizes Representative Zara of the Void Collective. Excuse me, the Harmony Collective. The correction drew gentle laughter from the assembled delegates. The former Void Syndicate had renamed themselves after the transformation, choosing to embrace the principles of cooperation rather than exploitation. Zara moved to the center of the chamber with fluid grace. I stand before you not as the being I once was, but as who I have become through the mercy and wisdom of those I once sought to enslave. Her words carried the weight of genuine remorse and hard-won wisdom. 50 years ago, I looked upon Earth and saw only profit. I saw a world whose resources could enrich my people, whose population could serve our needs. I was blind to the most valuable resource of all, the capacity for growth, for change, for becoming something greater than what we were. She turned slowly, making eye contact with delegates throughout the chamber. The humans did not defeat us through superior firepower, though they possessed it. They did not conquer us through fear, though they could have inspired it. They transformed us through something we had forgotten existed. Compassion paired with strength, mercy backed by unwavering resolve. Former warlord Vexithol, his forearms now bearing the simple work clothes of a terraforming engineer rather than elaborate military regalia, stood next. The decades of physical labor had changed him, stripping away the arrogance and cruelty that had once defined him. His eyes, once filled with conquest and domination, now held the quiet satisfaction of someone who had learned to build rather than destroy. I have spent the last 50 years bringing dead worlds back to life, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Worlds that I helped to kill in my pursuit of empire. Every plant that grows in soil, I've helped to heal. Every creature that finds sanctuary in habitats I've helped to create. They are my teachers, showing me what true strength looks like. He looked directly at Ambassador Kimura. You gave us something we didn't deserve and couldn't understand at the time. The chance to choose who we wanted to become. Not through force or coercion, but through example. Through showing us that there was another way to live, another way to relate to the universe and each other. Supreme Arbiter Omnarch, now calling himself simply Olin, had changed perhaps more than any of them. The ancient being who had once commanded the respect and fear of the galaxy now served as a humble mediator in disputes between minor species. His ornate robes had been replaced by simple garments, and his multiple eyes held a peace that had been absent for millennia. I have lived for over 2,000 years, he said, rising slowly to his feet. I have seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, witnessed wars that consumed entire sectors, overseen the exploitation of billions. In all that time, I believed that power was the only truth that mattered, that the strong ruled because they deserved to rule, and the weak served because that was their natural place. He paused, his ancient voice trembling slightly. It took humans, a species I dismissed as primitive, to show me that true power lies not in the ability to dominate others, but in the capacity to lift them up. not in taking what you want, but in creating abundance for all. Ambassador Kimura listened to these testimonies with the same calm attention he had shown in the original tribunal chamber, but his expression had softened over the decades. The hard steel of his earlier years had been tempered by wisdom and success into something more flexible, but no less strong. Your words honor not just humanity, but all the species that have chosen to walk this new path with us, he replied. But let us not forget that transformation is an ongoing process. We gather today not to celebrate our past achievements, but to commit ourselves to future growth. He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. But this was not the static representation of old star charts. This map was alive, pulsing with the flow of trade, communication, and cooperation between thousands of worlds. Behold the Galactic Harmony Network, Kimura announced. Every point of light represents not just a world, but a community of beings working together to solve the challenges that face us all. Climate restoration projects that span multiple systems. Research initiatives that combine the knowledge of dozens of species. Cultural exchanges that enrich every participant. The map zoomed in to show specific examples. A former battlefield where human engineers worked alongside Crimson Hegemony refugees to build schools and hospitals. A research station where Void Collective scientists collaborated with Earth botanists to develop crops that could grow in previously uninhabitable environments. A fleet of ships crewed by mixed species working together to establish first contact protocols with newly discovered civilizations. But our greatest achievement, Kimura continued, is not technological or military. It is philosophical. We have proven that a galaxy can be governed by principles other than fear and domination. We have shown that cooperation is not weakness, that mercy is not surrender, that strength can be used to protect rather than exploit. Elder Raji Thrun, the ancient precursor who had emerged from hiding to support humanity's rise, materialized in the chamber through a quantum projection system. Even after all these years, his presence carried an aura of vast age and deeper wisdom. Young Ambassador, the elder said, his voice carrying across eons of experience. When my people first withdrew from galactic affairs, it was because we despaired of ever finding a species capable of wisdom to match their strength. We watched civilization after civilization rise only to fall into the same patterns of conquest and exploitation. The elder's form shifted slightly, becoming more solid, more present. Your species has broken that cycle. You have shown that evolution is possible, that beings can choose to become better than their nature would suggest. More importantly, you have created a framework that allows others to make the same choice. Captain Phoenix Reeves, now Admiral Reeves and one of the senior coordinators of the Harmony Network, stepped forward. Her hair had gone silver over the decades, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her legendary during the Liberation War. The network currently includes over 30,000 inhabited systems, she reported. But perhaps more significantly, we've had first contact with 47 previously unknown civilizations in the past year alone. In every case, we've been able to establish peaceful relationships and offer them membership in the network. She gestured to a section of the holographic display that showed the galaxy's unexplored regions. Our deep space exploration teams report that there are likely hundreds of civilizations we haven't encountered yet. Each one represents an opportunity to grow the network, to add new perspectives and capabilities to our collective understanding. Ambassador Kimura nodded approvingly. And what of the remnant territories, the systems that still refuse contact with the network? Admiral Reeves's expression grew more serious. They continue to maintain their isolation, but our intelligence suggests they're struggling with the same problems that plague the old galaxy. Resource wars, territorial disputes, populations living in fear of their governments. Some of their leaders have sent unofficial feelers about possible cooperation agreements. The door remains open, Kimura said firmly. We will not force our way of life on anyone, but neither will we abandon those who genuinely seek a better path. History has shown us that transformation is possible for anyone willing to embrace it. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's chief xenobiologist and one of the architects of the network's integration protocols, activated another section of the display. This one showed not star systems, but evolutionary trees, biological and social development patterns that tracked how different species had changed since joining the network. "The data is remarkable," she reported. "Species that joined the network show measurable improvements in every quality of life metric we track. Longevity, psychological well-being, creative output, technological innovation, all trending upward across the board." But perhaps most significantly, we're seeing the emergence of hybrid cultures that incorporate the best elements of multiple species traditions and knowledge bases. The display showed examples. Zephyrian wind songs performed with human orchestras, creating music of impossible beauty. Crystarch logic systems enhanced with human intuition, solving mathematical problems that had puzzled scholars for centuries. Void collective energy manipulation techniques combined with human engineering, enabling the construction of structures that defied conventional physics.